Hey guys, when it comes to mobility, we often train only our hips, but let's not forget our shoulders. Today, we show you 2 exercises to improve your overhead mobility.
So guys, before we jump into our 2 exercises, we have to keep in mind that these 2 exercises are not the only exercises we can do in order to improve our overhead mobility. Really important to know is that rotational capacity, so internal and external rotation, is our fundamental joint movement or fundamental joint motion. So we'll keep that in mind when we'll go through the exercises, but we're going to show you 2 that will definitely help you expand your range of motion for your overhead mobility.
So this is our first exercise. We're going to hit the rotational capacities of the shoulder. So it's so important to open up more rotation, internal and external rotation, so we can generate more workspace in our capsule in order to get more flexion and extension. So it's so important to work on rotational capacities first before starting going into flexion and extension. So that's why we target external rotation of our shoulder with external rotation pails and rails. For the setup, go in a prone position, elevate your elbow so that your elbow is on the same height than your shoulder. Then we're trying to find a stretch where you cannot lift off, so that's your passive end range. So we're gonna show you here. We elevate her wrist and I'm telling her that she needs to try to lift off from here, and she's able to lift off slightly from here, so it's not her passive end range. So she should not feel a very deep stretch here. We're gonna elevate this yoga block a little bit, and we wanna make sure our wrist is on the elevation and not our hand, because as we try to lift off, especially for the rails contraction, which I'm going to talk about later, she's able to lift off if her hand is on the yoga block, because a lot of people are compensating in this type of exercise, and as they compensate, they go into wrist flexion and wrist extension, and yeah, their hand is not touching the block anymore. So we find a deep stretch here in this position. You should feel it around your shoulder area and really sink deep into the stretch and make sure you're not hanging down with your lower back. Really have a tight core, and from here stay in the stretch for 2 minutes. After the 2 minutes, slowly ramp up your patel's contraction. So what the patel's contraction is, basically you try to slowly put pressure onto the yoga block, push your hand, your wrist into the yoga block, 30% of your max effort, 40%, 50, 60, until you reach the 100%, and you're gonna stay in that max effort for 15 seconds. Push down as hard as you can. If you have pain, let's say if you have pain at 80% and you want to push more, just stay at 80% and don't force any injuries or more pain, okay? 15 seconds of the pails, then the rails. Right after, immediately after the 15 seconds, try to initiate a lift off. As we showed you, she cannot lift off from here, so it's a perfect setup. She engages all the rails tissue, so everything here, and she holds that contraction for 15 seconds. The shoulder stays in place. After the 15 seconds, she goes back into the stretch. Maybe she doesn't feel the stretch that much because she improved a little bit her range of motion with only 1 set, so we can slide it a little bit more to her elbow so the hand is even higher and she can feel an even deeper stretch. And we're going to repeat that once on each side.
So now that we've worked on our rotational capacity, external rotation, we can go into some linear movement, which is flexion in this case, because we want to improve our overhead mobility. In this case, we're going to go through a passive range hold as a partner exercise. I'll bring him into his passive end range. So before we start, I'll ask him to engage his core and have a slight posterior pelvic tilt because he's lying prone. If I ask him to go into too much flexion, he'll go into extension of his lower back, and then it's not shoulder flexion, but also lumbar extension. So I'll ask him to engage his core and his glutes to have a slight posterior pelvic tilt. And then I'll bring him into his max shoulder flexion, into his passive shoulder flexion. And then when I feel okay, should be right around here, I'll come out of it by 10 to 15 degrees. I ask him to radiate and to keep the tension, and I'll let go of my hand, and he's supposed to hold it right there. At the beginning, you can go for 10 to 15 seconds, and then he can release, and then we go back into shoulder flexion for our second rep. Again, posterior pelvic tilt. Max shoulder flexion, we come out by 10 to 15 degrees, ask him to radiate to keep the tension, and he's holding it all by himself, just about shy of 10 to 15 degrees of passive shoulder flexion. And that's how you build strength in your end range or in your passive end range for shoulder flexion. And that's a great exercise to improve shoulder flexion for overhead mobility, which incorporates any exercise that you do overhead. So shoulder presses, pull-ups, pull-downs, snatches, all that. That's where you can incorporate these two exercises to get a better range of motion and get stronger over time. So if you're really strong, if you've been working for a long time on your mobility, then we're going to show you some advanced stuff that you can do to incorporate this. This is by all means no starting point. This is what you do when your mobility is pretty good and you just want to get it even better. In this case, you have an ankle weight around your wrist, and again, the wrist is on the edge of the yoga block. You have a posterior pelvic tilt, you engage your core, you inhale before you start, and then you'll lift off. Okay, so do you see this amount of space in between the block and his wrist? We're gonna elevate him even more, because when we do a lift off, we want the lift off to be just barely off the obstacle. So you should be able to lift off in order to really train in your end or close to your end range of motion. Okay, so that's much better. We could even elevate him a little bit higher, but that's much better. And then you hold it for about 2 to 3 seconds, you lower down, inhale, engage everything, and then you lift off again, and you repeat that for about 6 to 8 reps. And that's your extra weight and an extra challenge.
Thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or subscribe to our channel. If you want more information and more videos about mobility, handstands, or skill training, visit our website or just leave a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.